At Jim Ellis Automotive, we believe buying a car should be quick, easy, and convenient, or in other words, as headache-free as possible. Hi, I'm Stacey Ellis, Vice President of the Jim Ellis Automotive Group. When you're ready for your next car, truck, or SUV, I invite you to visit jimellis.com. It's the easiest way to shop and compare more than 5,000 new, certified pre-owned, and pre-owned vehicles. Find the right vehicle that's right for you and use the Jim Ellis Expressway to start or complete your entire purchase online. Calculate your payment, determine the value of your trade, secure financing, and more. At Jim Ellis Automotive, you can shop from the comfort of home, on the go with your mobile device, or in person at any of our 21 family-owned and operated dealerships located throughout Metro Atlanta. For your convenience, Jim Ellis Automotive also provides at-home services, including test drives, new vehicle delivery, and some service appointments. Ready for a quick, easy, and convenient car buying experience? Visit jimellis.com today. Jim Ellis Automotive, where you can always expect the best.
Well, welcome to the Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today we have another candidate that we are going to be interviewing as part of the Candid Conversation series, more like the Candid Conversation series. And please remember, if you're watching on YouTube, to subscribe, to like, comment, all that good stuff. And as we're having this discussion, please engage with us in the comment section. Let us know what you agree with, what you disagree with, what you like, what you don't like. This is how we provide feedback to our candidates as well as to the show. So thank you for all of your involvement and feedback for those who have commented, liked, and shared, and subscribed, and all that good stuff. Okay, now that that part is out of the way, I want to introduce you to Dr. Sam Brown Parks. She is an elected official who is running for office. I'm not going to get into her race just yet because I like to start these conversations off by getting to know the candidate, the person, and just who they are at their core. And I want to start with some basics. So we like to talk about background information, but you know, it's been said oftentimes that our candidate has been seen as what we call the Buckhead Betty, or, you know, just kind of like the suburban woman who is affluent and just living her best life. But Miss Parks has come from some humble beginnings, and from now on, we're going to call her Dr. Sam because that's the name that's what I normally say anyway. But Dr. Sam has come from some humble beginnings, and I really want to dive into that because a lot of times we can label people without knowing who they really are. And then you make these assumptions and you make decisions based off of narratives instead of the facts and the truth. So welcome to the show, Dr. Sam. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely. And I want to really jump into your background. I'm so grateful that you are willing to share your story. Can you just start with your upbringing, growing up on the farm in Central Florida, and just some of the challenges that you've experienced and how that shaped your life?
Absolutely. So as you said, I grew up in Central Florida in a very, very rural agrarian part of the state. My parents were very much involved in citrus farming and cattle for a while. So my day was really based around waking up with the chickens, literally, feeding them, making sure all the animals are taken care of before I got on the school bus and went to school. And this was not your, you know, grand farmhouse. I lived in a single wide trailer in the middle of a pasture. And life, I didn't know it at the time, but it really was not easy. It was not easy for my parents. It was not easy for us financially. And even though I had college educated parents, they had been brought back to their small town to take care of their parents, which is important to us as a family.
So I know you're talking about your parents, and you know, your father had a unique situation. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how your father's situation and his past decisions affected how you saw family and how that transpired into your decision to go into the healthcare field and just your career decision as a whole?
For sure. So I don't keep it a secret. I pretty much have no secrets because I think that's dangerous. My father was incarcerated in 1980 when I was 7 or 8 years old for a bad business deal, and really not the nefarious kind of things, but he was the first person in Florida to be charged with racketeering. So that brings us to the current state of affairs that I'm watching. Because as a 7 and 8-year-old, you don't really understand what's happening. You say, did daddy do something good or did he do something bad? Well, he made some bad decisions and other people did bad things and he was involved.
Okay.
And you start to learn at that point that life is not black and white, that you can make a path for yourself. And sometimes, like my father, that path gets turned sideways and everyone around you and everyone in your circle has to adapt. So it really taught me a sense of flexibility and a sense of what's normal. You know, as my friends are going to church on Sunday evenings to choir practice, I'm still at the prison seeing my dad every Sunday, every weekend. And that sounds horrible from a white middle class Atlanta suburbanite, essentially, but it was my normal. And you learn that the people that are there are still people and they have stories and they need health care and they need the basics. So I have a bit of a pause when it comes to how we treat the incarcerated here in Fulton County because of that. But I also use that as a lesson to my own children, that when life gives you a curveball, that's not the end. You just make a different path.
Yeah.
So I used that to kind of not as a negative, but really as a guide to find a path out of rural Central Florida, because I realized that was not the path for me. You know, father in prison or not, I really was not going to be raising goats and chickens my whole life, at least not as a career.
Right. It's funny because now everyone wants to go back to that now, right?
Well, that's what I was thinking. I really wouldn't mind a chicken or two.
I know. I'm glad you mentioned just how we view those who are incarcerated. You know, I sit on the Board of Corrections here for the state, so I'm not. The county is different beast, but I represent the state. And when I go in and I talk to those who are incarcerated, I do think that there is such this misconception around these individuals. A lot of it is because you only hear of the bad stuff. You only hear of the things that are happening in the prison system that's negative. But there's so many people that are rehabilitating their lives, and we cannot, cause or judge people based on one bad decision or a few bad decisions. But it's not the totality of their life. So I think it is important to note that. I want to continue with your journey. So you mentioned in your short bio that you went to college at 15. What was that like? And how were you able to navigate that? How did this happen?
So once my father was out of prison, my parents divorced, and I went to go live with my mom in South Florida, which was much more urban and had more educational opportunities as far as different classes that you could take. You could take classes over the summer and get ahead. And I was on that path. I wanted to get on to the next step, which at the time I thought was going to be urban planning and law. And I was a full year ahead by the time I started 10th grade. And by 11th grade, when you're really, you're a kid who should be only at football games and you're studying, you study during spring break, you study during summer break, all you're doing is studying. I realized this is not a very efficient use of my time. And I decided to leave early, skip my senior year, and go to University of Florida. The only hiccup in that was I didn't have money to pay for it myself. So I read a clause in the Broward County School Board book that we are entitled as Broward County taxpaying residents to 13 years of education. And so I petitioned the school board to pay for my education. And after a little bit of balking and back and forth, they did. So I left at 15, I went to college and, sped my way through.
Wow. How did you know you were ready? Just not just on the educational side, right? Because I would assume you felt prepared to go forward on that side, but emotionally, how was it? Was spending time with your mom that matured you, or what would you say was a catalyst to preparing you to do something like this at such a young age?
So good or bad, trauma in your early childhood can make you either retreat or become mature faster. And for me, it was becoming mature faster. I was responsible for my younger sister. She's 4 years younger, but 6 grades behind me. I was tasked with taking care of her. We lived in apartments that my parents had built. They were in construction for a while, and I was tasked with getting the rent from the renters, and these were not high-end apartments. So I learned to defend myself. I learned what needed to be done on a day-to-day basis just to be an adult in Central Florida, at 13, 14 years old. So when I got ready academically, I think I was already ready emotionally to just move on and take over and of my own life, not take over others.
Wow. Okay, so now you're in college. Take us through college all the way to your now medical career.
So college started out, it was a little bit of a shock. Even though I was mature, I wasn't ready to be around a bunch of kids who were, a lot of them 4 and 5 years older than me. My college roommate was 21 because she was a 5th or 6th year senior. And I was going to fraternity parties with people much older than me. And it really, looking back as an adult, I probably should have been bubble wrapped a little more. But, you learn lessons, you survive, you learn how to get along. And it was nose to the grind. It was learning how to study on the background of having essentially a party school. And getting good enough grades for what I thought was going to be law school. And then around junior year, there were the Gainesville murders, and it really hit home. I was living off campus at that time, and I lived in fear. I'm from the country. I had a gun, and I walked back into my apartment and heard something in my room, and took my gun out as I was trained to, and almost shot my dog. And I was like, this isn't the world I need to be living in. And I actually transferred out my senior year and finished in South Florida so I could be closer to my mom. And at that time, I realized maybe law isn't for me. I have a background in biology just from being on a farm. I had to take care of animals. We didn't take them to the vet. We didn't have health care of any sort. Not only did we not have health insurance, but there were no true healthcare.
I always hate to interrupt a great discussion. However, we got to pay the bills. So we're going to take a quick break, get some commercials in, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. You're listening to The Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Now you're going to be brought back into a conversation between myself, Janelle King, and Dr. Sam, who's running for Georgia State House District 54 right here in this great state.
In my small town, there was no hospital. So a lot of what we did was just learning from grandparents how to take care of each other. And so I think that love of caring for people and caring for animals led me more into biology at that point. And I decided, hey, I think I need to go to med school. And I took 17 prerequisite hours in one semester and got myself up to speed and got into University of Miami.
Wow. Okay. So this is quite fascinating to me because you've done a lot in a short period of time. When I mentor young women, and I want them to hear about this type of resilience and focus, because a lot of times you feel like because you're young, you don't have the capacity to make certain decisions, and in some cases, like you said, with trauma, you shouldn't have to make certain decisions, but you're showing that even in those moments, you can still persevere and have control of your life, even though you may not have control of the environment. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think that it's important, and I tell my own kids this all the time, that you really just, the preparation is not necessarily the course preparation or knowing the actual steps. It is being prepared to be led in a different direction than you planned on going. And it's what makes life more interesting. I mean, I feel like I have done a lot in my 51 years that a lot of people didn't get the opportunity to do. And I think it's because, whether I liked it or not, I rolled with the punches, and I took those side turns, those little trips off from the big path.
Yeah. So going now we're in your career, you're in your medical career. Let's talk about what type of medicine you studied and you are currently working in, and why.
So when I got into medical school, I have to back up and tell this part because this was kind of a crucial turning point. We had no way to pay for it, and University of Miami is a private school. It was a lot more money. It was more money than my mom's house was worth. So I joined the military to pay for it. There was a full scholarship. I got the health profession scholarship. And in exchange for that, I had to be an Army officer. So I was in the Army for 7 years. And part of that is doing your internship in the Army. At that time, when I graduated from med school, I was certain that I wanted to be a radiologist. And I did my internship, and I did my first beginnings of radiology. And I was approached by my colonel, who said, you know, Captain Brown, you really talk too much to be a radiologist. Perhaps you should look at seeing patients one-on-one. And at first I was offended because I wasn't bad at what I was doing, but I did realize that I was not using my true potential, which was connecting with people and talking to people and solving their problems, and not sitting in the dark looking at films. My husband was a civilian, so I decided at that point not to finish a residency in radiology and to pay back my time to the military as a general medical officer. And then I went to the field and I took care of soldiers. I ran a troop medical clinic in Tacoma, Washington. And I learned that I could make a much bigger difference being that person for the soldiers. And that was really life-changing. And to know that there's these 18-year-old kids, and I wasn't much older than that, I was 23, 24, but they looked up to you, and you were not only their officer, but you were their caretaker, and you were responsible for keeping them healthy enough to defend us. And that really is what shaped my professional career. When I got out of the Army, we came to Atlanta. My husband started teaching at Emory, and I got my master's of public health because I wanted to see how we could translate that, filling that gap, into larger numbers. And that was a remarkable experience. But again, it was missing the one-on-one human contact. And so I did family medicine, and it was the perfect fit. I stayed at Emory, and I taught first through fourth year med students one-on-one and in groups of 8 or 9. I would follow them through their med school career as a mentor in class with them, and then discussing what they learned and how it translates to patients. And then the afternoons I would see my own patients. And it was wonderful. So not only am I helping my own patients, my own population, but I'm helping new doctors learn how to make those connections, and teaching the cardiology and the renal and all of that stuff too. But more importantly, will you translate that to people who come to you for help?
Man, that's phenomenal. Thank you for your service. It's my husband got out as captain in the Air Force, and so when you said Captain Brown, it rung my ears. But so thank you so much for your service to this country, and thank you for your service to people. The medical industry is very much so a service industry, and oftentimes you get the bad rap because of the healthcare discussion, which we're going to talk about. But I wanted to just encourage you in that regard. So thank you. So let's get into your race. That's a perfect segue because I have so many policy questions I want to ask. But let's just first start with, can you share with our viewers what race you're running in, or what district you're running in, and what parts of Georgia that comprises of, for those who may be watching who may live in your district?
Sure. So I'm running in House District 54, which is a rectangular shaped area Inside the perimeter, that is the upper part of Sandy Springs, all the way down through the commercial and residential parts of Buckhead, down to below Lenox Mall. I don't pass into the DeKalb County line. I'm all Fulton, in between Roswell Road, Peachtree Road, over to the DeKalb line. There's about 46,000 voters there. And it is the heart of Buckhead. When we talk about Buckhead on the news and the good and the bad, it is right there.
So it's a good mixture. And as you've been engaging with your district, what are some of the concerns that you're hearing and how do you plan to address them?
Sure. So number one is safety. And it is my biggest concern. It's why I got into the race. My children were no longer safe. They couldn't go to the mall. The last time my older son drove my younger son to Lenox, there was a shooting. And it really shakes you because you think of those things as being outside your circle. That brought it all home. Residents of our district don't feel safe doing regular day-to-day activities. You can't go to the grocery store without having your windows smashed. You can't go to the mall and shop for prom clothes or just the normal things that we take for granted outside of living in a urban city. So safety is a huge concern, and not just from the personal property crime and physical crime on us, but also from the environment that we've created. So that brings us into border control. You really don't want to have criminals who are not prosecuted coming into your community. And most importantly, from the border crossing issues, is the fentanyl crisis. Our kids aren't safe in school. Our kids aren't safe to be kids and do the things that teenagers invariably do. There's a much greater risk. This isn't, we went to, a college party and my friend's still, throwing up in bed from drinking too much. This is, my friend didn't wake up.
Right.
And when we cross that line, it brings a whole new level of concern for safety. So safety of the community, safety of our kids. It's a lot. And I think it's a lot for community members to deal with, and it takes a toll on everything else.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Policy issue number one is definitely safety measures. We need to back our law enforcement. We need to make sure that they're well trained and trained in everything, which is a lot to ask them, trained in identifying behavioral health issues. A lot of people who are committing crimes are not doing it because they're evil in their soul. They're doing it because there's other things going on up here that we may not fully comprehend, to feel like they have backup when they do pursue hardened criminals, and to have the training on what to do with things like fentanyl, to have Narcan on board. So there's a lot of training that goes in, and we should be supporting them at every step. The flip side to that is that prosecutors need to be held accountable for processing those people who have been captured, who have been taken in and, brought into the system. They can't sit there. You can't have people sitting in jail for that long. Something needs to be done and moved on. Due process is real, and we need to live up to that. So following through with that would be, I think, a good place to start, to hold prosecutors accountable.
It's interesting. The safety issue is a real one. For those who don't live in Georgia or in the Atlanta area, there's been some change, but it's a real thing. I think about how when my husband asked me, so what's your plans for the day? If I mention anything about going into the city, his next words have always been like, make sure you have your weapon, make sure you have this. And that's uncomfortable, right? Like we shouldn't live in a society where we have to make sure we have protection in case something happens, not necessarily to you, but around you, right? So that is a major, major issue. Now, you will be going into the state house here in Georgia. So you will be a vote of one. what are some key issues that you would like to see the House work on as a whole? Now, I know safety is something that is pertaining to your district, but you'll be voting on issues pertaining to the entire state. So are there other topics or other issues that are really concerning you or on your radar?
So there's several that, and I do know it's a vote of one, but it's defending not only your own part of the state, and we're in the northern part, but realizing that as a House representative for the state, we are the last level of defense from bad federal policy.
Mhm.
And there's been some bad federal policy that's come through in the last few years. So I feel like that is one way that we can have a voice at a larger level. But specific things that I would like to see happen, I would like a statewide property tax cap for individual homeowners. We have a big housing problem, and increasing property appraisals because people are moving in and values are going up, and skyrocketing millage rates where your tax bill is twice as much as your mortgage, and all of a sudden you realize I can't afford to live here anymore. You flee, and then there's empty properties, then you have more economic decline. All you have to do is drive through Buckhead and look at all the empty businesses. It's not just a residential issue, but we can approach it on the residential side by capping the increase statewide and hoping that the municipalities will follow through with the recommendation, because I do know that they have a way to weasel out of that. It would help protect seniors. It would help protect individual homeowners, and trickling down, it would help renters as well, because if you're not having to pay so much in property tax, then you don't have to pass that on to the renters. A lot of times that gets lost in the translation, that overall decrease in ownership prices means a decrease in rental prices, or it should.
Absolutely.
And I also think that there is room for improvement in how we approach large corporations owning multiple rental properties.
That's a good point. I remember sitting in this was in a city, like a local, I guess they were getting ready to sell properties that had been taken due to, not paying your taxes and, the courthouse sales. And I remember sitting there, and I remember, at the time, I was just supporting some elected officials. So I wasn't necessarily a part of the process, but I watched people come in hoping that they can negotiate so they can, on their tax fees, so they can keep their homes. But then when the bidding started, there was no choice. They had no opportunities to actually keep their home because they were bidding against these huge corporations. And they were coming in at an astronomical amount of money that just completely wiped out those who was just like, I have the money to pay off the minimum fee that I have. It was hard to watch. And I, as a capitalist, I believe in capitalism. I believe that every business should have the right to do whatever is necessary to help grow their business. But there is something to be said about these corporations buying up these large swaths of land and homes. I see that as a challenge. What would you say is the biggest issue with that?
I think there has to be, I too am a believer in capitalism and in free markets. And so it does cause an internal conflict when we talk about this, because you want businesses to prosper. But there has to be a way, if we as politicians and policymakers are going to create regulations on people, let's create regulations that help individual homeowners, and perhaps keep large corporations from moving into neighborhoods. And I understand that that's who can afford apartment buildings, but individual houses, if there is a way that we could compromise them being owned by individuals, or limiting the number of individual home units that a company can have. And I don't mean multifamily use, I mean single family.
hmm Well, you know what? Let's talk about it, right? So when you have an individual who purchases their home, there's a different level of respect. There's a different level of ownership that comes with that than when you have corporations buying up homes and then they are renting, because obviously they're not living in all these homes. So they typically rent them. And when there's a lack of ownership, sometimes there's a lack of responsibility. And now we're talking about, in some cases, people don't necessarily take care of their property as well as those who are individual owners. And then that can cause conflict in the community. So I see where you're going, and I see a host of issues when you have those type of decisions. So, but let's shift gears a little bit into healthcare, because this is your bread and butter. So let's talk about healthcare. I think a lot of people are wondering about Medicaid expansion. What are your thoughts on Medicaid expansion? And would you support it or not support it going into this seat?
So I have to admit that before I got involved in politics in the last 2-3 years, I thought that I was completely against Medicaid expansion because of the numbers didn't make sense. You know, I'm somebody who always balances my checkbook, and I don't want a deficit. There's no reason to ever take on debt. There has to be a smarter way of doing it.
Yeah.
And until it was dissected for me in multiple different versions, I didn't realize that there is a way to accept those federal funds, but also limit our financial risk in doing so. Now, ideally, with all healthcare, I think, oh, you're going to get me on a roll. To really solve the problem, you need to scrap the whole thing. There doesn't need to be third-party payers at all for anything other than catastrophic events, because that's where you mess up capitalism. You mess up free markets. When you have someone in the middle who's taking dollars from both sides, and the two ends, both the supplier of the product, meaning healthcare, and the consumer, the patient, aren't getting the value of that sum in the middle. There's something wrong with that system. And so that's where we would start in an ideal world, but yeah, that's not feasible. With the Medicaid expansion, there are ways to limit, and I don't mean limit care, because that will be taken as a soundbite at some point in my life, but to limit the breadth of things that are covered. And as someone who grew up without healthcare, I do understand the need for basics. And as someone who provides that level of healthcare to many Medicaid patients, it's truly important. And that preventive care is, it's really paramount to health of a community. But again, there are ways. This doesn't mean a free-for-all. There should not be Medicaid expansion that looks like our fee-for-service from 30 years ago, when the rest of the world doesn't have that. So until those markets change, we can't make a market that looks like that. We can't make a system that looks like that, but we can supplement. And one of the ways that that can be done, and I don't know if anyone is bold enough to do it, is to take those healthcare dollars and put them essentially into an HSA, a debit card, and make the recipient responsible for their own care. And with safety nets for catastrophic, but for your preventive care, for your, in and out doctor visits, you have a pot of money just like anyone else would, and that's your responsibility. I like that idea in theory. I'm not sure that would
It's interesting, because when you were talking about potentially that someone taking the soundbite and turning into something else, the fact of the matter is we have to talk about it. I agree. I like you was 100% against Medicaid expansion. I think that right now, though, we have to talk about where we are and how we're going to address the state that we are in currently. And when you have, I believe it's around 80 million people in the country on Medicaid, and around 1.2 million doctors who are able to take Medicaid. And I think we're in a crisis situation. However, Our healthcare system has not put an emphasis, in my opinion, on preventive care. It's been a lot of emphasis on sick care, right? And taking care of you once you're sick. Well, cost is going to go up dramatically if you're going to the hospital once you're sick, but if, to your point, they had these funds that could be utilized towards healthcare in general, maybe they will go to an integrative specialist that may cost them $1,000 to get a workup just to see where they can start tweaking things to be preventative. I mean, there's so much room to address this issue, but it just takes bold people to stand in the gap and tell the truth. And that's why I think it's great that you're there and you're in the medical field. Do you plan on utilizing your skill set to help educate the legislators, as well as not just the House, but the Senate as well, on how we can do better with healthcare?
Absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the big reasons why I was pushed to run, because I think that there is a big gap in knowledge of how, when you write a bill, what that means in practice. And there's only 4 healthcare providers in the House, under the gold dome at all right now, and we could use more just to have a voice in kind of rational care of our community. And a lot of that goes to behavioral health as well. We can't just give dollars and say, here you go. Patients need guidance. I mean, not everyone went to med school, even though there's Google there. Dr. Google knows a lot, but you have to be able to process those facts and all of your data together. And that is the beauty of our profession. That's what we're trained to do, to see what actually could have a positive outcome in the end.
I always hate to interrupt a great discussion. However, we got to pay the bills. So we're going to take a quick break, get some commercials in, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. You're listening to The Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Welcome back to The Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Now you're going to be brought back into a conversation between myself, Janelle King, and Dr. Sam, who's running for Georgia State House District 54 right here in this great state.
So I'm not saying doing this without guidance and without education, because that would be a large part of it, but looking at all the aspects of health so that people are healthier and then happier and then work more and make our state more money and everybody's happier. I mean, it all feeds into each other. And I think looking at it globally like that is important. But yes, having a true boots on the ground healthcare provider who can come in and just kind of explain those issues to the people who are good-heartedly writing pieces of legislation that are meant to help other people. Let's make it something practical and useful and efficient.
Yeah. So I like to throw in a question that I think will speak to our Gen Zers, our younger generation, because they're paying attention, they're watching. What would you say as it relates to your platform, or not just your platform, but maybe just your personal thoughts? What are your thoughts on the housing crisis in the general? And I know we talked about taxes, but what about affordable housing? Or a lot of our young people feel like they are just not in a position where they'll ever be able to purchase a home. Is there anything you think we can do to assist with that? Because that definitely stretches across both sides of the aisle.
So I think there is a space in there for a coming together, almost like a rent to own or a lease to own way of dealing with property owners and with renters. And back to affordable, having mixed use is a great way of doing that. You keep people in the cities where they're wanting to work. You have less transit time. You have less infrastructural decay from road use. So that helps everyone. But if there's a way that you could use some of those rental dollars to be banked and as a forced savings program for a down payment, you could go a long way to helping younger people eventually own that home.
Yeah. Okay, so out of all the people that I've asked that question to, or I've asked about that, I feel like you've given the most detailed response I think I've heard. I
Yeah.
mean, an actual plan. Well, because I hear things all the time, and a lot of times it's plans that are so far away, it's impossible to achieve. But I think that's so practical, right? If you were to have a conversation with even some of these corporations that are buying these homes, on how to work out a plan towards leadership. Now, lease to own has been around for forever. However, our young people are typically not even in a position where they can go into a lease to own, right? So they can only rent, and then that typically doesn't translate into home ownership. But there's so much to that. I mean, it teaches responsibility. It puts them in a position where they are already kind of acting as owners. Man, I love it. I love it. I love it. I want to
If I am
expound.
nothing else in the world, I am definitely practical, probably to a fault.
I am gathering that. I prefer our elected officials to be practical, to have one foot in the world where we're just regular people that's going on, trying to take care of our families, trying to just be normal, and then have the other foot in the world of policy. That's what I prefer. I think that keeps you grounded. And with you having the upbringing that you've had, having to work with renters, I'm sure, you kind of pulled from there as it relates to thinking about this strategy. So let's go into just before we get into the fun part, and that's what we're going to close on. And then we're also going to talk about
That's the fun part.
the would you rather is always fun for me.
Okay.
But before we get into that, let's talk about bipartisan support. You will have to work across the aisle, and going back to you being practical, I don't see that being a problem for you at all. But what would you say is your strategy for working with Democrats to help get some of this stuff done?
So strategy, it's education and it's communication. And I have a very split district, if you want to make it a partisan view. It's very purple when you mix those two together.
Yeah.
I hate partisanship, and I really dislike that we have become so polarized. And life is not, as I said earlier, life's not black and white. Your choices aren't A and B. It's not a binary situation. There are all sorts of shades of gray in between. And it's learning those shades of gray that teaches you how to be a better person, but also gets more done. When you have, this majority in the balance, they're always in our other side, the Democrats, they can't make headway on the things that I may support because they're in the minority. And we will be in the same situation if it were to flip-flop. And I feel like it really negates a lot of the good that we try to do by being partisan. And so my approach when going door to door, and my approach in my political strategy, has been to leave the Republican off. And it's not because I am a constitutional conservative through and through, but I also understand what it's like to be a tax-paying adult human in the real world. And there's a balance there. And so when I go door to door, I don't talk about partisanship at all. And I usually make a lot of headway. And so just yesterday, that number on my flyers rings through to my cell phone. Oh. And I answered it, and we talked. And he's like, "What? I need to know what party you're with." And I said, "I'm a Republican." He goes, "That's a damn shame." And he hung up the phone. So sometimes you can't make headway, but I was making headway up until that point. And I think that in the House, you can do the same thing. I mean, these are not, we like to say mean things about the other side, but these are intelligent people who were elected to be there. And there is.
Unfortunately, I have to stop it there because we are out of time. However, if you want to listen to the full conversation, feel free to go to my YouTube page and just search the Janelle King Show. Very, very easy. Check it out while you're there. Please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe. Or if you can't do it all, do one. Hopefully it's subscribe so that it can continue to support the channel. Thank you so much. Until next time, stay unafraid, unapologetic, and never stop seeking the truth. This is the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. See you next week.
At Jim Ellis Automotive, we believe buying a car should be quick, easy, and convenient, or in other words, as headache-free as possible. Hi, I'm Stacey Ellis, Vice President of the Jim Ellis Automotive Group. When you're ready for your next car, truck, or SUV, I invite you to visit jimellis.com. It's the easiest way to shop and compare more than 5,000 new, certified pre-owned, and pre-owned vehicles. Find the right vehicle that's right for you and use the Jim Ellis Expressway to start or complete your entire purchase online. Calculate your payment, determine the value of your trade, secure financing, and more. At Jim Ellis Automotive, you can shop from the comfort of home, on the go with your mobile device, or in person at any of our 21 family-owned and operated dealerships located throughout Metro Atlanta. For your convenience, Jim Ellis Automotive also provides at-home services, including test drives, new vehicle delivery, and some service appointments. Ready for a quick, easy, and convenient car buying experience? Visit jimellis.com today. Jim Ellis Automotive, where you can always expect the best.
So, Robert, I want to thank you for your time. I just don't think you're the right person for this position.
I don't understand. Was it something I said?
Well, we did a background check on you and found some things of concern.
If you're in charge of hiring for your company, you know how helpful a background screening can be. That's why companies that use Horizon background screening make smarter hiring decisions. Don't let the wrong hire put your company at risk. Get the real story on your candidates at horizonscreening.com. horizonscreening.com.